There is a silence that lingers after you leave a narcissist, and it is not the kind you hear with your ears. It is the kind that settles beneath the surface of everything, humming quietly, relentlessly. It fills the space where your attention once lived, where your presence once stabilized their fragile sense of self. They feel it in the stillness of their rooms, in the absence of the admiration they grew accustomed to receiving from you. They try to outrun it with noise, distractions, and new faces, but silence follows them everywhere, because no amount of external stimulation can replace what you truly gave. You were not just company, you were confirmation that they existed. What you offered them was not simply affection or validation. You gave them reflection. You became the mirror that made their inner fiction feel real, the witness that turned their false self into something believable. Narcissists do not fall in love with people. They fall in love with reflections of themselves. And unknowingly, you became their most faithful mirror. You absorbed their chaos and returned it as understanding. You forgave without apology. You offered empathy where none was ever returned. You believed their pain could be healed through love. You believed consistency could calm them. You believed you could save them. That belief was not weakness. It was humanity. But it was also the illusion they needed you to live inside. They were never truly alive in the moments you thought were intimate. What looked like affection was hunger. What sounded like love was need. They fed on your warmth because they had none of their own. They studied your empathy like a script, memorizing it, rehearsing it, performing whatever role was required to keep you attached. Every compliment was calculated, every apology was strategic, every grand gesture was a move in a game you didn't know you were playing. You thought you were building something sacred, they were building a throne, and your devotion was the stone it stood upon. Then one day, you left, or perhaps you were discarded, the way a magician discards a trick once it no longer dazzles the crowd. At first, they feel triumphant. They tell themselves you were too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding. They rewrite the story so they can remain either the hero or the victim, whichever version earns them more sympathy. But the performance eventually ends. The applause fades, and then the silence arrives. No audience, no reflection, no one left to project their myth onto. That is when your absence begins to haunt them. Because without you, they are forced to face what they have always avoided, the emptiness within. The narcissist's greatest fear is not losing love. It is losing the reflection that convinces them they exist. Your absence dismantles their illusion of control. It exposes their dependency. It reminds them that every ounce of power they possessed did not come from who they were, but from what you gave. You were the current that powered their false self. And when you cut the cord, the lights went out. That loss is unbearable because it reveals a truth they cannot escape. They will try to replace you quickly, desperately. They will grasp for new people, new admirers, new sources of validation who can play your role, but it never feels the same. Because what you offered was not imitation. It was authenticity. You gave without calculation. You cared without strategy. You loved with depth. They can mimic your gestures, but they cannot recreate your essence. And so each new connection becomes a dimmer version of what they once had. A weaker reflection, a lesser supply, and they feel that loss, even if they never admit it. When they lie awake at night beneath the bravado, beneath the performance of indifference, they feel the void you left. Not because they love you, but because they cannot tolerate what your absence reveals about them. It reveals that without someone to admire them, excuse them, or believe in them, they are nothing more than an echo pretending to be a voice. You might think they have forgotten you. You might see them posting, laughing, performing happiness. But appearances are their currency. The louder the act, the deeper the emptiness behind it. The truth leaks out in ways they cannot control. In the bitterness that sounds like longing when they speak your name. In the way their eyes lose focus when your memory surfaces. In the way their new relationships collapse into the same hollow pattern. Your absence is not just felt. It is studied, denied, dissected, and revisited. They cycle through resentment and nostalgia because you were never just a chapter in their story. You were the only moment it ever felt real, and that terrifies them more than abandonment ever could. It always begins beautifully, almost divinely. The narcissist arrives like a revelation, someone who seems to see you in ways no one ever has. Their words feel precise, almost poetic. Every glance feels intentional. Every compliment feels destined. They do not simply enter your life. They infiltrate it softly, skillfully, like light through stained glass. You feel illuminated, chosen. You think this must be love. What you do not yet see is that you were not chosen for who you are. You were chosen for what you could give: validation, energy, worship. The seduction is never accidental. It is an art form, a calculated performance designed to make you surrender your boundaries willingly. They study your past, your fears, your unmet needs. They memorize your wounds and your hopes. They map your emotional terrain with precision. Then they present themselves as the cure. When you speak, they listen not out of empathy, but strategy. Every vulnerability becomes leverage. Every confession becomes a tool. You begin to believe this connection is fate. Their affection floods your nervous system. It overwhelms your logic. You don't fall in love, you become conditioned. They create a fantasy where you are perfect, where your flaws are adored. But this perfection is their design, not your truth. You are idealized so completely that when they withdraw their affection, the fall devastates you. This is not love. It is control disguised as connection. Their flattery is conditioning. Their intensity is manipulation. They disarm you emotionally before you realize you are exposed. It feels spiritual, but it is chemical. A cycle of reward and withdrawal that binds you to their orbit. Cruelty is masked as passion. Distance is framed as depth. They know how to appear vulnerable just long enough for you to lower your guard. They know how to cry on cue. They know how to speak the language of empathy without ever feeling it. When they tell you they understand you, it is not understanding. It is imitation. They mirror your humanity back to you because they have none of their own. The most dangerous love begins with worship and ends with confusion. And by the time you notice the cracks, you are already invested in saving an illusion that was never real. Those are the moments that keep you hooked because you think you've touched their soul. But what you've touched isn't their soul, it's their wound. And slowly, you begin to confuse your empathy with purpose. You start believing that your role is to love them enough to heal them, that your devotion can fill the emptiness they refuse to face. But no one can heal someone committed to performing their pain. They don't want healing. They want an audience. They crave admiration for suffering, not transformation from it. They need you to believe that if you leave, they'll collapse. And you do, because your compassion is both your greatest strength and your deepest vulnerability. Yet even the strongest hearts cannot sustain an illusion forever. The illusion always cracks, eventually. Perhaps it is a cruel word, a subtle dismissal, or a sudden withdrawal. Maybe it is the cold realization that the love you counted on was never consistent. It was always conditional. And in that moment, the entire structure begins to tremble. You start to see that what felt like destiny was carefully designed. You notice the unease of waking from a dream too perfect to be real. Looking back, the signs are hauntingly clear. The speed of attachment, the intensity of affection, the way everything felt scripted, cinematic. It was not love. It was a seduction engineered to make you forget yourself. You realize you were not chosen for who you are. You were chosen for the stage they needed. And so you stand in the aftermath of the illusion, torn between longing and clarity. Part of you still misses the warmth, even knowing it was artificial. That is what makes this manipulation so devastating. It doesn't just break your heart, it fractures your understanding of what love even means. And the question that lingers long after the illusion fades is haunting. How many times in your life have you mistaken intensity for intimacy simply because you were starving to be seen? The unraveling begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, like fog creeping in. Slowly, clarity erodes. Slowly, the dissonance between their words and actions begins to whisper that something is deeply wrong. You start to notice subtle but persistent inconsistencies. They say they love you, yet their tone carries disdain. They insist you are overthinking, but your body trembles with unspoken knowing. Something feels off, and every time you reach for certainty, it moves further away. Reality itself warps. You used to trust your instincts. Now you second-guess them. You used to speak freely. Now you rehearse your words, wondering how they might twist them. You once felt confident and alive. Now you walk on eggshells, unsure which version of them will appear today, the charming savior or the cold executioner. That uncertainty becomes your new normal. Silence becomes safety, and self-expression becomes peril. This is the method of control, not chains, but confusion. The narcissist does not need to shout, they simply distort. They rewrite reality so subtly that you begin to doubt your own sanity. When you call out their cruelty, they deny it. When you describe your experience, they insist it didn't happen. You become both witness and accused in your own life. Small seeds of doubt are planted, too sensitive, too dramatic, remembering things wrong, and each seed grows into a forest of self-doubt. You lose yourself inside it. They provoke you until you break, then point to your reaction as proof that you are unstable. Eventually, you start to believe it. Because when someone you love insists on your unworthiness long enough, the truth feels like arrogance and doubt feels like humility. You try harder. You strive to become easier to love, more understanding, more forgiving. You apologize even while bleeding. You convince yourself that this is what commitment means. Patience, endurance, sacrifice. Yet deep inside, a quiet voice whispers that something sacred within you is being dismantled. You ignore it because acknowledging it would mean facing an unbearable truth. The person you trusted most has been weaponizing your love. Your mind rationalizes what your soul already knows. You create stories to explain their behavior. You tell yourself they are wounded, that their past made them this way, that your compassion can heal them. And in some sense, that is true. They are wounded, but their wound is their weapon. Each time you forgive without accountability, you reinforce their power. You mistake endurance for virtue, but endurance in the face of manipulation is not virtue. It is danger. Near the breaking point, a strange moment arises. The mask slips. Perhaps it is in their eyes. A cold emptiness, a flash of contempt, something reptilian and unfeeling. And for the first time, you see clearly that the person you loved never truly existed. They were a projection, a reflection of your hopes and longing. You see the patterns, the lies, the way they built your devotion brick by brick only to consume it for warmth. The realization shatters you, but also frees you, because once you see, the spell begins to break. You start to understand that love cannot coexist with domination. Empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. What you thought was love was actually a mirror maze designed to keep you chasing someone who does not exist. And when that truth settles, it hurts deeply. It hurts more than betrayal because it annihilates the fantasy you built around them. Yet within that pain lies power, the power of sight. Once you see, you can never unsee. Even if it costs everything, you begin to withdraw. Not dramatically, not all at once, but inwardly. You stop explaining, defending, pleading. They notice the shift and panic. They escalate, use seduction, rage, pity, anything to reclaim the power lost. But the awakening has begun. You have tasted the truth. You have glimpsed the freedom of detachment. That terrifies them because they thrive on attention, positive or negative. Indifference is their death. So they push harder, lie deeper, love bomb again, attempting to pull you back into their orbit. But once you have seen through the illusion, no performance can fully seduce you again. Still, the internal battle continues. You miss them, not the real person, but the imagined one. The one who seemed so perfect, so divine, so alive. You grieve the idea of them while knowing the reality. And that is the paradox of loving someone who was never really there. The heart mourns a reflection, even as the mind awakens to freedom. You replay memories endlessly, questioning which moments were genuine and which were manipulation. You mourn someone who never truly existed. That is the cruelest aspect of these relationships. It forces you to grieve an illusion. Yet even that grief is sacred because it signals the beginning of your return to yourself. Slowly, faintly at first, you begin to see your own reflection again. You remember your laughter, your intuition, your calm. You recognize that the love you gave was not wasted. It revealed your capacity for depth, for empathy, for endurance in the face of cruelty. These are qualities no one can erase. They are yours, immutable. The moment you begin to attach meaning to your pain is the moment healing starts. You find yourself standing between two worlds, the familiar comfort of illusion and the terrifying freedom of truth. Staying promises a slow, invisible death, leaving promises rebirth through struggle. And perhaps the question that lingers, soft and trembling, is this: what if the suffering wasn't meant to break you, but to teach you the sacred distinction between being seen and being used? When you finally walk away, it does not feel like triumph. It feels like collapse. Air leaves your lungs, and the world loses its color. Freedom feels heavy because you carry the weight of all you once believed that was not real. Looking around, you realize that your entire emotional universe was constructed around someone who was never truly there. The absence is unbearable at first, almost supernatural. You are not only missing them, you are mourning the illusion of safety, the promises of love, and the version of yourself who believed you were special to them. You grieve the story you thought you were living, as though it were flesh, and far away in the quiet corridors of their emptiness, they feel it too. They will never admit it, not to anyone, not even to themselves, but your absence pierces them like a wound that refuses to heal. The narcissist does not feel your loss as love. They feel it as the loss of their reflection. You were their mirror, their audience, their source of psychological gravity. Without you, they drift, untethered from reality. They will attempt to fill the void immediately, seeking new supply, another admirer, another stage. To them, love is never connection. It is performance that must continue uninterrupted. They repeat the script, the charm, the flattery, the fake vulnerability. Yet now the performance feels forced. The laughter lacks resonance. New admirers cannot replicate the depth you once provided. Beneath their arrogance, they are addicted to the intensity you gave, and it frustrates them endlessly. You cannot be replaced, because what you brought was not mere presence. It was meaning, authenticity, depth. They may convince themselves that you were too dramatic or emotional, but deep in the quiet, when no one watches, the mask slips. They scroll through old messages, replay your words, recall the stability you offered, your patience, your empathy absorbing their chaos. They will never call it love. It would imply vulnerability. But beneath the excuses, a raw awareness festers. Your absence has created a vacuum they cannot fill. The narcissist craves what they destroy, needs what they reject, and is haunted by what they cannot control. Indifference becomes their defense mechanism for dependency. Their new relationships inevitably follow the same script. For a time, they project fantasies onto the next person, seeking what they once projected onto you. But novelty fades, admiration feels shallow, empathy feels weaker, and unconsciously, involuntarily, they compare. They remember how deeply you felt, how much of yourself you offered. They may convince themselves you were too much, but secretly, they know you were everything. And that knowledge gnaws at them. Meanwhile, you slowly learn to breathe again. Nights replay their laughter, apologies, the moments that felt real. You question if they ever loved you, and in that questioning, clarity emerges. Their love was never love. It was dependency masquerading as devotion. They loved not you, but what you made them feel about themselves. This revelation is simultaneously devastating and liberating. You reclaim your voice, your self-worth, your clarity. You realize that your empathy was strength, not weakness. You loved deeply even when manipulated, and while they tried to drain it, they could never destroy it. That light was never theirs to keep. Pain transforms into proof of your depth. As time passes, grief does not vanish, but evolves. You find beauty in the silence that once terrified you. You learn that peace is not absence of noise, but presence of self. The love you poured into them begins to return piece by piece. The narcissist, however, remains trapped in repetition. Their cycle continues. New mirrors, new illusions, repeated patterns. They are haunted not by guilt. Guilt requires empathy, but by emptiness. Every subsequent relationship reminds them of what they lost and can never reclaim. Your absence becomes a standard no one else can meet, and they resent it. Your silence, your healing, your peace, they all remind them of their failure to control you. You confronted pain and rebuilt yourself. They remain in denial. Your absence becomes their mirror, reflecting truths they have spent their life avoiding. They do not miss you because of love. They miss you because without you, they must face themselves. Silence, in this case, is revelation, louder than any words could ever be. It narrates your survival, your awakening, your return to truth. And that is what terrifies them most. Not your warmth, not your love, but the unbearable weight of your absence. The proof that the only person they truly lost was the one who saw them and still tried to love them. Healing is subtle. It arrives quietly, disguised as small acts of defiance. The first time you stop checking their social media, the first time you say no without guilt, the first time you stop explaining yourself. Each moment is a reclaiming, quiet, invisible, unstoppable. At first, this feels almost wrong. You were conditioned to believe love requires self-sacrifice. Now you see that love without self-respect is not love. It is servitude. The emptiness may linger. You may miss them, or at least the version of yourself that existed when you believed in their affection. But the memories hurt less. You no longer idealize them. You analyze patterns where you once saw meaning. You understand that what you called love was a reflection of your own longing, a search for validation that only you could grant yourself. This realization does not harden you, it deepens you. Your empathy, openness, and hope were not weaknesses. They were sacred qualities, misused by one who could not receive them. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is reverence for your soul. Forgiveness is not for them. It is for your freedom. Forgetting is not healing. Remembering without pain is. You do not heal by erasing what happened. You heal by reclaiming who you are. As you rebuild, you stop seeking closure, understanding, or validation from the person who thrived on your doubt. And then you begin to feel something extraordinary: peace. Fragile, circumstance-dependent, but growing steadily from truth. You see meaning in the wreckage. Pain becomes initiation, brutal yet sacred. It strips illusions, exposes blind spots, and forces you to confront what should never have been tolerated. Strength emerges not from perfection, but survival. Meanwhile, the narcissist continues the cycle, seeking new mirrors, repeating patterns, living in denial of emptiness. But you have moved beyond their orbit. You carry the lessons, the wisdom, the self-respect, and the light they could never extinguish. You are no longer prey to performance or manipulation. Your silence, your boundaries, your healing speak louder than any apology, confrontation, or explanation ever could. Your life, rebuilt from pain, becomes testament. And that is the ultimate liberation: surviving what sought to destroy you, reclaiming what they could never take, and finding in yourself the reflection of truth, love, and resilience that no narcissist could ever erase. They remain trapped in a loop of false beginnings, unable to face the truth that you've already integrated. You have become what they fear most: someone who no longer depends on their perception. Someone whose silence, composure, and indifference speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Anger would indicate that you still care, but indifference signals freedom. Self-respect becomes the quiet revolution that dismantles the reign of every manipulator. As you rise, people notice the difference, not in arrogance, but in alignment. You move with intention, speak with measured calm, and carry an energy that no longer bends to misunderstanding. Your presence becomes weighty, undeniable, and wholly your own. You will learn to love again, but it will be different. Not from need, not from scarcity, but from overflow. You will recognize the signs of manipulation instantly. The absence of love masquerading as affection, control disguised as connection. Some days will be challenging. Old wounds whisper lies and question your discernment. Maybe it was your fault, maybe they'll change, maybe it was love, but your truth answers louder. No, it wasn't love, it was a lesson. Your pain becomes your compass, your boundaries become architecture, and your intuition once again guides you with clarity. What once felt like suffocation now becomes guidance. Eventually, you will see yourself as you always wished to be seen, whole, illuminated, reborn through fire. You will understand that the depth of your empathy and your capacity to love were never wasted. They were preparation, forging the person who can now live differently. You no longer chase what shines, but honor what sustains. The love you tried to give them was always meant for you. The turning point arrives when you stop waiting for them to feel your absence and begin to feel your own presence. You start to enjoy your own company, creating a life that does not rely on the acknowledgement of the blind or the manipulative. At this point, silence becomes your loudest statement. You no longer argue, explain, or rationalize the inexplicable. Detachment is not born from spite, but wisdom. Your energy is sacred, and you no longer grant access indiscriminately. This marks the transformation from survival into sovereignty. The peace you feel hums quietly, subtle as the stillness after a storm. The narcissist, ravenous for validation, cannot comprehend this calm. They expect the old dance of chaos and reconciliation. But you do not return to the script. Your absence, your disengagement, and your quiet power become unbearable for them because narcissists thrive in reaction, and your indifference reflects the unfillable emptiness of their existence. They search for mirrors and illusions, but nothing can replace what they lost in you: authenticity, depth, and the purity of your presence. You were never their supply. You were their mirror. And mirrors leave marks that deception can never erase. They may continue the cycle, seeking new connections, testing others with the same strategies, but every encounter reminds them of what they cannot replicate. Meanwhile, you evolve. You reclaim the meaning that was always yours. You learn that true self-love is responsibility, not indulgence. You build a life where truth, integrity, and authenticity guide your choices. You trust yourself again, honor your boundaries, and no longer confuse generosity with tolerance. Eventually, without effort or fanfare, you realize you no longer think of them. The spell has broken. You walk through the world differently, lighter, quieter, freer, more alive. Closure is no longer necessary because your healing provided it from within. You give love to those who can receive it, create rather than fix, and speak truth even when your voice trembles. You become the living proof that even the deepest betrayal can open the door to authenticity and self-realization. What once seemed like destruction now stands revealed as revelation. The heartbreak was never punishment. It was the sacred path back home to yourself, and you finally walk it with open eyes. You no longer need them to feel your absence because you have filled that space with purpose. This is the moment of transcendence, when survival transforms into creation, when pain crystallizes into wisdom, when heartbreak becomes initiation. You see now that your suffering was never meaningless. It was transformative. It burned away illusion and left only truth. And in that truth, you find not bitterness, but grace. Freedom is no longer about forgetting them. It is about remembering yourself so fully, so completely, that they no longer define a single chapter of your story. You smile again, not because life is perfect, but because peace has taken root within you.